Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mean Green Gridiron podcast, and I'm your host Billy Sear, and I'm joined once again by the oh man, I don't have what do I have for Carter this week? I can't remember what it is. He's
You didn't
oh
come
yeah, he's the
prepared?
he was no, I remember what it was. I recently found out that Carter was at one point in the top five ranked Elvis impersonators in Denton County recently. So you guys might know Carter from that. Found that out about Carter, so now you guys know if you didn't already know.
Oh, huh.
There it is, man. You can clearly see why he pulled that one off.
I
But
have I have finished fourth 3 straight years. I've been off my game. I really need to get back into practicing and getting in character. But
I don't know, man. You sounded in good form to me. But we're joined by someone else new today, Evan Frantum. Evan is he's one of our resident ball knowers in the Mean Green circles, and we're adding him into the Mean Green podcast cinematic universe. Evan, how's it going, man?
Not too bad. Appreciate y'all for having me on. Excited to be able to talk UNT football with someone other than my fiance, who really couldn't care less and is probably ready to have another outlet for me. So
that's why we do
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
yeah. So this is Evan's first Mean Green podcast appearance, and I think listeners you'll probably hear from him more, whether here or elsewhere, maybe his own thing. But yeah, this won't be the last time. But we are here to talk about the 2026 Mean Green defense and special teams units. This was obviously a big point of, I guess, emphasis or even concern. You could even say going into the Neil Brown era. Obviously, whether it's Latrell or Morris or Neil Brown, anytime you hire an offensive head coach, your first question is kind of going to be, what is the defense going to look like? Who's the defense coordinator going to be? What kind of scheme are they going to run? Can they in this era, are they going to be able to bring guys with them and kind of head start the transition and the implementation of the defense, kind of like what Skylar Cassidy was able to do last year with bringing the Sam Houston guys. So um, we have the depth chart pulled up here. The Matt Powledge era is ahead of us. You've probably seen some of the comments or juxtapositions of Powledge and Matt Capone. They look similar. They're kind of similar age guys, but obviously hoping for different results under Powledge. So it was kind of one of those surprise hires. I think we were kind of hearing some names about sitting defensive coordinators. Powledge does have coordinator experience. I'm not 100% sure if he has play calling experience. I think he did at Baylor. I know Aranda was the head coach, and he was kind of the head coach. It's his defense, but Powledge was kind of under him calling plays as a coordinator. Evan, go ahead and let you go first. What were your thoughts about the Powledge hire initially when you kind of first heard it?
Yeah, I think when I first heard that Powledge got hired, I hadn't heard of him before. I really didn't know who the Baylor defensive coordinator was. The first thing that popped in my head was, man, Baylor hasn't been good in a while, so I don't
Yeah.
know if I like this hire, but I also know that it was just kind of a crazy moment to sit back and think about how North Texas was hiring sitting P4 coordinators onto our staff. I think that's not nothing. And I also quickly did kind of jump into that mindset of working under Dave Aranda when he is a defensive minded head coach. No matter how much play calling experience that Matt Powledge might have gotten at that time, there's no way it was a fully, the defense is yours. I'm not going to meddle with this. I'm not going to, kind of throw my influence under there or kind of give you pointers on where I think we need to do this or that, because at the end of the day, it's the head coach's show. And when he focuses on defense, I think we haven't really gotten the best view of what Powledge's defense would be. And I do think he called plays in 2023.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, obviously, when you're, an offensive coordinator under an offensive coach, or like you said, defensive guy under defensive coach, you're kind of limited, I think, in how much of your imprint you can have. You're kind of, like you said, it's that guy's show, and you're trying to, execute it to the best of your ability. This seems like a lot more of, what is going to be his vision and his imprint on the defense. We talked about, obviously not knowing a ton about Palage. I didn't know a ton about Palage either. I know they were, they've kind of been up and down with Baylor. Obviously, it was 2021 or 22 was their big year. 24 they were decent, but just kind of really haven't sustained success lately under Aranda. Carter's our resident Baylor expert, so Carter, someone who maybe does have a little more familiar with Palage than the other two of us. What were kind of some of your thoughts and impressions on Palage hire when you heard about it?
Well, I try my best to, I surround myself with ball knowers in the North Texas community. We study the stats, we know the players. I admire Baylor from afar contextually because I did not go there, but pretty much everybody in my family did. So I view Baylor football from a very passive standpoint, if you will. And I think it's easy in a sport of 136 teams to anytime a defensive coordinator gets fired, everybody celebrates. I think there's like 7 schools in the country that could fire their defensive coordinator today and people would be like bummed out because everybody's reactionary, right? I know Baylor's rush defense was really bad last year. I know they weren't great at generating turnovers. But he does have, he has been around a couple of good defenses. Like you mentioned, he was part of that, 2021 staff that won the Big 12. I did watch a lot of those Baylor games. That defense was really aggressive and talented. So it's not to say that 1 year defines, who he is as a coach. Having said that, not coming off the greatest season, there's a couple players we'll talk about later who were part of that defense. Baylor's defense and offensive shortcomings are more indicative of Aranda at this point than any of his assistants. So I'm with Evan. Like I want to see what Matt Palage's defense built by him looks like. So I feel optimistic, I guess. A little reserved. Again, like I said, Baylor was one of the worst rush defenses in the country last year, and they did not turn the ball over at all. So, there's room to improve and a building block to work off. But other than that, I mean, I've seen the Capone defense. It can't get worse. So,
yeah, no, we'll see exactly what you said. Like this is his first season, and we'll see what his defense looks like. And we have some names of what we think the defense is going to look like, and that's what we're going to go over here. So starting on the defensive line, I think this is probably one of the more polarizing and kind of variable groups on the team in general. I think this defensive line, you've got a lot of names, you got a lot of guys who've kind of played some degree of college football and have some pedigree, but I think there's a lot of guys who are kind of in that same range as just kind of players, guys who played but haven't really ever been like impact players. So I think that's kind of what I'm going to be looking out for this year, is like who's going to be the guy who kind of steps up and leads the charge. Right now you've got David Anaha at defensive end coming over from UMass, who went 0-12 last year. You got Justin Benton from East Carolina, Terrell Washington, a returner who was kind of in the 2 deep last year for UNT at D tackle. And then Curly Thomas showing as a starter right now in the other defensive end spot. He's a transfer from Cal. Behind then you got some other names. Stephen Curtis played at Minnesota. A big theme of the acquisitions this offseason was guys like Curtis who came from Minnesota, a Power 4 school, but previous to that had playing experience at the Division I level. He played at FCS, Illinois State under new defensive line coach Ben Black. Christian Lorenzo also coming from Illinois State with Ben Black. Wesley Hudson coming from, I believe, was Central Oklahoma. Davion Rhodes coming from Georgia Southern. So just a lot of names, Braden Knox, AJ Brown, Rudy Vargas are back. Udoka Izani was kind of a sack specialist at UTEP last year, but kind of an undersized defensive end otherwise. So again, just like a lot of names who I think are kind of anybody kind of on the starting line or the even that third unit there. I think they all could play, could kind of emerge as guys just as easily as whoever's maybe starting. So anyways, like I said, a lot of guys, a lot of names to parse through. Evan, who are some of the guys that you're kind of keying on the defensive line that you think might be more of impact players this year?
Yeah, I think one name that really jumps off the list to me From a perspective of experience, I think that they've started over 40 games, as well as received praise from Neil Brown during spring ball and maybe media days. I can't remember for sure, but it's Davion Rhodes, who I think that they call Chewy Rhodes. And I actually think that he will probably be the starter on that right defensive inside over Curly Thomas. I think that the experience, I mean, at Georgia Southern, I can't remember the exact stats, but it was basically 2 straight seasons of 13 starts. And so at the FBS level, that level of experience on the defensive line is radically invaluable. And Curly Thomas, prototypical size for Curly Thomas, but has not really been a contributor the entire 4 years he was at Cal. So I expect it to start there and probably have a pretty strong season. Maybe a little bit of an Ethan Day type season in comparison to last season. And so he's a big one. And then I also think that kind of hybrid rolled down linebacker that left defensive end is for Palage's 4-man front, a little bit of an undersized position I think that they use for the speed to get to the quarterback. I am really interested to see. I know that they have Stephen Curvis and David Anoha in front of Eziani, but I do think that Neil Brown had said that Eziani playing Texas on film was just an absolute menace, that he was built to be playing at that level and was giving that offensive line fits off the edge of the whole game. So I'm really curious to see what he can bring if you put him in the right positions to just focus purely on creating pressure in the pocket.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think he's listed at 6'1", 216. So because of his size, I think it's kind of hard to see him as like an every down player. I think he's probably more of a third down specialist kind of guy, but you need those on your roster. And if that's what he does well, then you do that. I think, it's kind of that New England Patriots philosophy of, tell me what this guy can do. Don't tell me what he can't do. Let's focus on what he can do. That was kind of a big part of their success over the years, besides cheating, on the field and on their wives, I think. But sorry my Patriot fans out there for that stray. But no, I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of the philosophy there. You mentioned Stephen Curtis. Stephen Curtis really has prototypical size as well that we just kind of don't see come through Denton very often. So I'll be interested to see how he kind of adapts to. He's playing under same coach that he started his career at Illinois State with. He went to Minnesota and didn't play a ton, but no, that's a good call about Davion Rhodes. I think you're right. He started a ton at Georgia Southern. I think last year wasn't the most productive, but like you said, the starting experience is invaluable and kind of coming off the edge there. I think there's a good mix of kind of production size, and just overall just different kind of bodies who can do different kind of things. Carter, what are some of your thoughts about the defensive line and this particular group?
Well, I'm a little bit beefing with Evan because he picked my defensive player of the year pick was Davion Rhodes. I think this guy's going to be a huge breakout. Yes, Evan, you are correct. He is a three-time consecutive 13-game starter. He has 100 total tackles, 18 tackles for loss over that period. I watched a little bit of Georgia Southern's tape. He looks a little bit bigger than his size is listed. I think he is at 6'2", 248 on our bio. He looks bigger, both in height and size. So he looks a little bit more intimidating than a 6'2" defensive lineman. But I do think I know he's listed kind of in the depth chart a little bit buried in the second and third string, but I do think he's going to emerge this year as one of the more reliable tacklers we have. And then not on the defensive line, but there was one guy I wanted to mention too who really intrigues me is Aaron Alexander at linebacker. Didn't really do a whole ton at Michigan State. Transferred to Arkansas State last year. He had 91 tackles. Most of his stats are coming from last year, but he had a really explosive year in the Sun Belt. And I think that, we've kind of gone – we'll talk more about, like, secondary players and other guys elsewhere in a minute, but there are some FCS standouts, particularly in the secondary, that we went for. So I like that they have some guys who are coming in with some G6 experience that have, pretty recently done impactful or had impactful seasons. I mean, I think Aaron Alexander is going to be kind of one of those like Wes Losky 2025 seasons where he's just all over the field and you just see him constantly making plays. Like I said, I mean, he just burst on the scene with 91 tackles last year after having 12 before that in 3 years. So that's a guy I think to keep an eye on. He's real explosive, real physical. But yeah, I had my my players highlighted for each position group, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to talk about Davion Rhodes, and then it just stole my spotlight. So it's all good though. I really am high on Davion Rhodes. I think he's one of the more under the radar pickups for this defense for sure.
Yeah, and Carter talked about it, just kind of having that P4 presence. Out of this group that's currently showing as starting, I think 8 of these 11 guys have spent time in their career at the Power 4 level. Naha started at Rutgers. Benton's been at Houston. Curly Thomas at Cal. Barker was at SMU last year. Alexander started at Michigan State. Jenkins was at Baylor for 3 years, and Tay Seymour was at Auburn and Georgia Tech, and then Keyshawn Davila came from Arkansas. So there's a lot of those Power 4, not just guys who come from there, but they really have, I think, the bodies, the frames that you kind of generally see at that level that you don't quite as often see come through North Texas. So I think that was kind of a focus, was to get those guys who, maybe they were studs at JUCO or FCS or G6 football, but then they went to Power 4, maybe didn't play as much, and get those guys in. The Power 4 schools picked them up for a reason, because they were productive players, because they had, the frames to be successful, but, whatever reason, they didn't pan out, didn't play a ton. And I think that's part of modern college football, is just that you get these guys. It's not like the old days where a team loses a starter and they're just, the spot's just open. They're shuffling between. A team loses a starter and they go out and get another starter from another school. So it is a little bit harder to kind of, transcend to the depth chart in that way. I think looking at the lower part of the depth chart, a couple of guys, AJ Brown and Braden Knox, were two of the better freshmen on our team last year defensively, true freshmen. They both showed flashes, and right now they're third string. And, I think that they could be a factor this year, and they could not. They could just be buried. And then by year 3, whether here or somewhere else, I think they could break out, and you would never know it because they just didn't play enough. That happens at the P4 level too. So those are guys who I hope we can keep on the team, keep developing underneath some of these older guys, because I think they are going to be players. And then one other guy I want to call out real quick before we move on to linebackers is Christian Lorenzo. He was a good productive player last year for, like I said, Ben Black at Illinois State. They went on to make the FCS National Championship game. He was a big part of that. 6'3", 297, started his career at Illinois. So he's, again, another guy who's played a lot of football. He had 18 starts at Illinois State last 2 years. 6 TFLs, 3.5 sacks over those 2 seasons. So again, productive player, experienced player. Right now he's listed in the second unit. I could just as easily see him starting at one of the defensive tackle spots. So I think that'll be those are the kind of guys that I think, as you're implementing a new team, new defense, just having that experience roll over could help make that transition smooth. With that, kind of going into the linebacking crew, Zakai Barker and Aaron Alexander, this I think has a chance to be one of the strengths of the team. Cedric Roberts behind him, Chance Johnson, and then behind that, this depth chart shows Samaje Burrow and Kenton Allen. I think more likely that's going to be Jaden Manning and Brendan Reese, who were the 2 true freshmen last year linebackers. So anyways, like I said, Barker was second team All-American Conference 2 years ago at East Carolina, goes to SMU and ends up being a backup there, comes back over here. And then Aaron Alexander, who was very productive at Arkansas State last year, I think 91 tackles. He was part of the crew that went to Media Day this year. So obviously Neil Brown thinks very highly of him. Evan, what are your thoughts on this linebacking group?
Yeah, I think a position that I'm super, super excited for, just because the linebacker position is such a influential spot on the defense, and that's kind of why they get the moniker the quarterback of the defense. And it's because it is a unique position that will both operate within coverage with speed, as well as influence pressure on the quarterback and cover that middle ground. So they touch a little bit of all of the kind of defensive phases that you need covered, and it looks like our linebacking core might be the strength of this defense. I mean, Aaron Alexander, anytime you can get a leading tackler of an FBS similar level program, you're winning the portal on pickups like that. I mean, there's nothing that can replace things like that. Sakai Barker, was all conference in our said conference just a few years back. Obviously, made that jump to SMU and didn't really carve out a role there, but that's most of the time not always due to talent or just anything like that. They just have such deep rosters, and they're bringing in so many people from the portal that you got to make a name for yourself in essentially 6 months to be able to start or even build out a role at those spots. So Cedric Roberts coming from Alcorn, again, extremely productive at the FCS level, which if you talk to coaches, if you talk to players, if you talk to really anyone that watches college football, you know that the talent at the FCS level is very, very close to the FBS level. It's just oftentimes the depth that they don't have. And so that's why you see a lot of FCS, FBS games stay really close all the way up until about midway through the third quarter. And then the depth is really what wears them down. So I think that the talent, when you can pull up those productive FCS players, is phenomenal. And then just kind of as a final note to cap off kind of the front seven, in my opinion, on that, I remember distinctly as we brought in Skylar Cassidy and we were looking for a massive turnaround on the defense back in 2025. And we kind of saw that massive turnaround. I noticed that it was something that they emphasized was having 3 lines on the front seven, the defensive line specifically, that they could rotate out consistently. When you look at this depth chart, we have tons of games played and experience, as well as non-true freshmen that have been in the program that are moving up to larger roles, where you really could have 3 distinct groups on the defensive line that can constantly keep legs fresh. And I think that will be a very, very big difference maker for our defense come those closer games in conference.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at the depth chart that I have pulled up here. The names that are in the orange color, those are newcomers, and then the names that are blue, those are returners. So like Evan said, we do have some returners sprinkled out, and I actually am pretty excited about some of these guys. Terrell Washington, like you said, they're non-freshmen. They've been in the program for a while, and I think that's something that we just don't necessarily see a ton, and we kind of forget how important that is to just actually be able to grow and develop over some years. But like you said, the depth I think is there. Cedric Roberts, like you said, to have that kind of guy as a backup linebacker, I think that helps speak to the talent level on the defense and the what they were able to bring in. And I think that's also pretty evident here in the secondary as we kind of look into this. So Caden Jenkins at one cornerback, I think you could make the argument that he might be the best player on the defense, or at least the most kind of the most heralded coming in. He played 3 years at Baylor. His freshman year in 2023, he was in the running for Defensive Freshman of the Year, had 3 interceptions. Sophomore year was not quite as productive, had some pass defenses, but wasn't quite the jump that they were expecting. And then I think last year he kind of ran into some disciplinary troubles and just kind of combination of off the field and on the field where he just kind of fell off a little bit. But if you look at his highlights, man, he kind of has that length and athleticism at cornerback that you just don't see come through Denton very often. We also picked up his twin, Cameron Jenkins. Brandon Jones at safety is another guy up from the FCS level who really, I think McNeese State really made a name for himself this spring. Looks like he's pretty entrenched as a starter. A younger guy, second-year guy. Then Tay Seymour. Tay Seymour, I think, is another really big pickup. He was a starter at Georgia Tech 2 years ago in the ACC, started 7 games for them, kind of came. We were able to land him. He was at Auburn last year, didn't play, and he had the previous relationship at Georgia Tech with our now general manager, Aaron Joe. So that relationship there, I think, was able to yield some benefit. And get a really quality player, which, again, you don't get a ton of guys with P4 starting experience a lot, but we have 2 in the secondary there. Peyton Taylor, Division II guy, Emporia State. I think he's one of the key guys right now when I look at the defense as far as, like, can he play? Because I think opposite Caden Jenkins, they're going to try and throw it on Peyton Taylor. Peyton Taylor's, 5'11", 167, not a huge cornerback. But again, in that role, I think he's going to have a lot of attention on him. I think Caden, if it's between throwing on Caden Jenkins or Taylor, I think teams are going to choose Taylor quite often. So I think how good he can be as our cornerback too is going to be a big indicator on the defense. And then that last spot, nickelback, Keyshawn Davila, transfer from Arkansas, was the number one JUCO guy a couple years ago. Number one, I think, JUCO cornerback. He's another lengthy guy. I think he's 6'1", which I found it kind of interesting looking at this defense that he's sort of the nickelback. I think what we're used to seeing in that kind of fifth defensive back role is more of a safety kind of guy who can kind of play in the box, cover tight ends. This one seems like more like a third cornerback as kind of the base starting unit. But, we'll be interested to see. I think I'm sure he's going to have to be a willing tackler to be that fifth guy. I know Caden Jenkins has some good tackling highlights. I think he's a willing tackler. But again, a lot of experience, not returning, but incoming from guys that we picked up. Zach Johnson played a ton, FCS level. CJ Coombs played a ton, FCS level. So, Evan, what are, kind of ran through the names here, but what are some of the guys that you're looking keen on here in the secondary this year?
Yeah. So just, based off of consumption of media days and something that Neil Brown said, a returning guy who I think is actually going to create a competition for that starting right cornerback side, and that's Chase Canada. Neil Brown said that he's really stood out in summer OTAs and had a really nice spring. And so that's a returning guy that could really, provide some depth and potentially even start at that cornerback spot. And then very, very excited to see Brandon Jones in this secondary. Just so much praise from all the coaching staff and everything that we've heard on. He's just flying around. And I just remember watching last year's defense and really seeing someone who was a massive difference maker in terms of their ability to flock to the ball, create turnovers, tackle well in space. And that was Will Jones. Yeah. And I think that he was just an absolute stalwart on the back end of the defense. And I think Brandon Jones has the ability to maybe do the same thing. So I don't want to say Caden Jenkins just because I think the expectation is for him to walk in and probably compete to be a first team All-American Conference player.
Yeah, no, I agree. Brandon Jones, whenever you said that, I was starting to see where you're going with that. And I was watching some highlights yesterday of last season, and Will Jones is like, man, I was really starting to remember what level of impact he made. Just like you said, with those turnovers, those were just such key plays in some of those games. The Army game where we got up big and they came back, and then the bowl game, and then kind of icing that UAB game. I think those are some big plays. Brandon Jones can kind of fill that role at least. Start to see that take form. That would be huge. And then Chase Canada, like you said. We talk about Keyshawn Davila. He was like the number one JUCO cornerback a couple years ago, goes to Arkansas, doesn't play a ton, then comes here. Canada was kind of like that a couple years ago. He was one of the top JUCO cornerbacks, went to Illinois, mostly played special teams there. Then he came to North Texas last year and was kind of that second unit cornerback. So again, actually having guys who can develop a little bit and then see what they look like in year 2, year 3, instead of just, hey, you're here for a year, let's see how you look. I think that's there's definitely value to that. And so I'm interested to see how Canada looks this year. And that's definitely a spot there at that cornerback position that could be one of the main position battles heading into fall camp. Carter, what are some of your thoughts looking at this defense or this secondary in particular?
Yeah, kind of on the topic of the quarterback battle. I know CJ Coombs is projected on the depth chart at nickelback. He played safety at Wofford.
Yes.
So I think maybe he might be able to slide in at corner or safety if need be. I'm not totally sure how versatile he is, but I know that they recruited him as a safety. So
I almost wonder if it's like a package thing. Like Davila is kind of like your coverage guy, and Coombs is more of your first down, second down, run defense kind of guy at that nickelback spot.
Yeah, for sure. He's a high tackler. He's one of the early guys they went after. So as far as like instant impact guys go, I feel like Coombs is probably in that category. I think that Brandon Jones is another candidate who might kind of crack that just playmaker tier in the secondary. The thing with Jenkins that I'm hoping that you said like the expectation is, he's going to come in and be like the talent he has all conference potential. I'm hoping that maybe the change of scenery for him, because like you said, he had some disciplinary issues at Baylor. I'm hoping that, maybe he can kind of ease some of that stress of trying to reach those freshman potentials. Just getting a change of scenery, getting a chance to be a catalyst on a new defense. Sometimes that's all it takes for guys like him. So I hope that that's part of his MO this year, is not trying to relive the player he was 3 years ago, because he really did struggle, particularly last year in Ballard's defense. So I wouldn't say that my expectations are low for Jenkins. I think that he and us as fans probably need to temper expectations and give him a chance just to get comfortable. But yeah, as far as like specific breakout guys in the secondary go, I think like you said, Coombs could be like a package kind of versatile slot in where you need him guy at safety or corner. Tyson Wilson's another guy I'm really high on. And yeah, I agree with Evan. Chase Canada, as far as like returners go, especially now with the loss of Jaden Bex on offense, the amount of returning guys you have that can be, difference makers is dwindling. So as far as I can tell, I went through the Our Lads page. I went through our roster on our website. I think Chase Canada and BJ Allen are the only two defensive returners, if I'm
in the secondary. We also have Taylor Starling
in the second. That's what I meant, in the secondary. Sorry, not on defense.
Taylor Starling, I think he was off the roster most of, if not all of last season, but my understanding was it was kind of an injury thing. I don't know why they took him off the roster. If that was the case, I think there was kind of some weird stuff going on there, but Taylor Starling's a guy who played a little more in those first two Morris years at cornerback, was kind of backing up Brian Nelson and Rich Tejada in those days. So he's another guy who's semi-returner, not necessarily from the 25 roster, but just from North Texas football in general. But yeah, otherwise I think you're right. I think it's just mostly Canada and Allen, and then Bryce Garza is a guy who kind of redshirt, who I've heard some good things about. He's got good size, and he's showing right now as the backup strong safety to Brandon Jones. So he's another guy who seems like he's a player. He's a a factor in the race, even if not necessarily a starter per se.
Yeah, for sure.
But okay, so yeah, with that, I think we kind of run through the defense pretty good here. One thing I'll kind of say, I think last kind of words about the defense before we kind of touch on special teams is I think defensively, what's going to probably help this defense a little bit this year is I think that Neil Brown, and we talked about this last episode with just Neil Brown and Chad Scott and Mike Blesh, that the DNA of this team is going to be running the ball. You got a big offensive line. You got a Big 12 all caliber running back in Jaheim White. You got some other backs who can do some things. So I'm curious on how much that helps out the defense this year, because obviously under Morris, under most air raid offenses, it's just the offenses go so fast that it just really makes it hard on the defense sometimes to catch a break. Even, I mean, how many times do we have just quick 3-4 play scoring drives, and then it's like the defense is back out there? That's obviously you take that, you take your touchdowns, and you don't blink about it, but just the toll over the game that the defense is just out there a ton does make things hard. And I do wonder if that's something that we see more this year, of more of a ball control, control the time of possession, keep the defense fresh, and then also like Evan said, keep cycling through these guys. Overall, do you guys have any thoughts on that, as far as maybe a defense that may necessarily not be as good as last year, but could rank higher, or that kind of thing, where you just you might have some things in your favor that maybe we didn't under the Morris era?
I would say just something that I'm really looking forward to with this defense that I do think is an improvement over last year's, and just kind of the formula of how we've managed the transfer portal, and that is the kind of diversity of experience and places that each player has been, and the backgrounds that they have. I think that Neil Brown, just as a whole, and his approach in year one to utilizing the portal on both sides of the ball is a stark difference from how we saw Eric Morris in the season 2023.
Right.
So I have higher expectations essentially for how this defense comes together in year one. Obviously, I'm not expecting, top 3 American Conference defense. Be great if that happened, but it's not my expectation. But I do think we could maybe be a top half. And that's partly due to, like what you said, Billy, is this offense is going to be a more defense friendly offense just from cadence and pace of play. So I think that will work in their favor. And then depth and experience goes a really long way at the G6 level. So.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think we were talking kind of pre-show that Evan and I are kind of in sync that I feel like the offense is probably going to have. Well, I'll say this. I think that we're definitely going to take a step back with turnovers, which is going to, hurt the offense a little bit compared to last year. Part of what helped us control our tempo so much last year is we were picking the ball off left and right and our offense kept getting chances to reset and just keep going and going and going. So, like both y'all have said, there's going to be a little bit more of a not a reduction, but a slowdown in tempo a little bit, and just a little bit more of. It's going to seem like more controlled football. I think Evan used the word control. Yeah, it's going to feel more like dictated and comfortable, as opposed to last year, which was aggressive on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see as many turnovers, but I also don't think we're going to see as many touchdowns on offense. But I don't think either of those are going to be detriments to the team. It's just going to feel, especially switching over to a 4-2-5. There's going to be a schematic change, and I agree with Evan. I like that Neil Brown has kind of gone with guys that have extensive, at least to some degree, extensive experience playing pretty much across the board. Every position group has guys who have been there and know what needs to be done this year. And I think that's probably a big part of the reason most people have us kind of floating around like 6'6", 7'5", somewhere around there where, there's really not anything that worries me about this team tanking into the bottom tier of the American this year, especially with how many teams are rebuilding. But as far as the defense goes, we are playing a really good or a high amount of really good offenses this year, especially just starting the season with Indiana, UNLV, and Texas State. Those are 3 teams that will try to put points on the board. So it's going to be a test for sure. But I do think that getting Palage in here, he and Neil Brown have coached together before at Kentucky. So I think they've known each other for some time. I think this is a good year to get comfortable and implement new guys and implement the new system, and kind of like the guys we touched on today. I think there are a lot of, excessive tacklers. There's a lot of guys who have, really good explosiveness and athleticism. Maybe not, the ball hawking secondary we had last year, but I still think it'll be a more than capable defense to at least keep us in most of our games. And I don't feel like this will be a group that gets so lopsided that we find ourselves on like a 4-game losing streak at any point or something.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think this is just very emblematic of new age college football, but we don't return a single starter from last year's defense, but we have guys who have been starters at previous spots. So it's kind of an interesting position. When you used to say this team's returning 0 of 11 starters on the defense, you'd say, oh, well, they're bringing in a bunch of, freshmen, underclassmen kind of guys stepping into roles, inexperienced, but that's not the case with our defense. Our defense is definitely very experience heavy across the board. A lot of returning starts, a lot of returning production. So, that'll be, I think, help ease the team into kind of its first era and help create kind of an identity for this team. Then going into special teams unit, you've got Jeff Crosby coming over as the special teams coordinator, coming from Appalachian State. He brought his punter, his place kicker, and his long snapper with him. So Ian Ratliff at punter, Dominic DeFreitas at kicker, and then Jacob Poff at long snapper. So also going into the return unit, I think the return game is probably one of my biggest question marks right now, just because this says James Tyre and Baron Tipton at punt returner, kick returner. I don't know if I expect to see 6'5" Baron Tipton back there. So I don't know how much stock I put in that. DeFreitas was decently reliable kicker. They weren't all conference kind of guys, that unit last year at App State, but again, they're returning starters, returning production. And then punt returner James Tyre, I think he's 5'8". He's a little shifty guy. He could be I think maybe a return guy, maybe your main return guy, maybe you have someone else. I think TJ Chukara from Black Hill State Division II. I think he was a guy who was a very good receiver there. I'd be interested to see. I feel like he kind of has that Simeon Evans body type where he's a little bit shorter, stouter receiver. Could kind of look more like a running back when he gets the ball in his hands. He's a guy I'd be interested to see maybe put back there. Josiah Martin's another fast guy at receiver. So kind of overall, I think special teams unit. Evan, what are some of your thoughts on this group, and whether it's the kicking team or the return unit? What are your thoughts about this team that could obviously potentially have big implications, even if it's not necessarily the sexy group to talk about?
Yeah, so I actually think the special teams unit and the continuity that they will be bringing to North Texas will be one of the most invisible but impactful units on the team. And I think that bringing the coach who has worked with these specialists, bringing the kicker, the punter, the long snapper, is going to pay huge dividends in terms of, I think, back to very specifically the game that should not have been as close as it was, and that was Western Michigan last year. And I think I remember counting 9 drives across the entire game that started past the opponent's own 40, where they were starting the field and we were starting within our own 20, like the same amount of times, like 9 in that game. And so that the special teams unit, the poor kicking out of bounds on kickoffs, the so many different things, the choosing not to field balls when you should maybe be fielding balls, all of those things go down to the special teams coaching and the unit. And so I look at the Dominic DeFreitas on the kicking. He was a true freshman last year, and something that kickers get better with experience. I mean, he was 18 years old, 17, 18 years old, kicking field goals as a starter on an FBS team. And he honestly wasn't so bad. I mean, his overall numbers were not world beating, but I do think that from 40 yards and below, he hit every single field goal he kicked and was perfect for extra points. And so I think that brings forward a level of stability that we didn't have in the kicking game, both on kickoff and field goals, which wasn't really an option for our offense. Right. So I think that's huge. And then the punter, again, I mean, we saw, I think it was Sawyer Evans last year. I was about to say Sawyer Robertson. He was a pretty serviceable punter. I think we have the opportunity with Ian Ratliff to have that same level of experience to flip the field. His average punt distance was, I think, mid 40s, 44, 45 yards, with 10 of his punts that I think he punted a total of 40 to 50, so around 20, 25% that were down within the 20-yard line. So I think that there's a level of continuity and growth that'll happen there. And I think that's going to, play a really big part in flipping the field, in getting big play momentum in close games. I think the special teams unit plays a really big part in that. And then lastly, I'll touch on the returning group. I think that this is a spot where Dalton Carnes will really shine. We saw him last year in the Charlotte game making clutch plays on special teams. And I think that he's just a guy that is a veteran that has seen a lot of college football, that doesn't get shaken in those big moments. We're not probably going to see muffed catches when the ball's hanging in the air. I think he's steady, and I think he's got some sneaky athleticism with some big playability. So I think that's kind of how I see that group rounding out.
I agree.
Carter?
I agree fully. I talked last week about how much I like James Tyre and what he did last year, and I think he's going to be one of the offensive breakouts. So I'm happy to see him get some opportunities in the special teams. Dalton Carnes, again, just a guy as far as returners go, I want to see him continue to develop. It's kind of the burden of being a G6 fan now is you don't get a chance to latch on to guys, but Dalton Carnes has been with us for a while, and just as losing Jaden Beck stings, you got to latch on to who you can. So I would love to see him kind of emerge in the special teams game. But yeah, I agree with everything Evan said.
Yeah, no, I mean, he definitely, I think, was a guy coming from Houston who had some production at Houston as a second year guy, redshirt freshman over there, and has just came into a group that just ended up being super loaded. I think even probably he would have told you he wouldn't have expected to be playing behind guys like Wyatt Young and Miles Coleman and DT Sheffield over the years. So yeah, definitely a loaded room that he ended up walking into here at North Texas. And as far as like the specialists, I think DeFreitas, again, numbers wise was reliable and solid. And so yeah, like Evan said, hopefully going to his second year, maybe he's a guy who you're able to trust a little bit further out, with a little bit more range and a little bit more reliability than kind of what we were used to in the kicking game. And Ian Ratliff was solid punter, averaged 43.8 yards per punt last year at App State. Before that, he was at Texas and played a little bit there, was right around the same average wise. So, like Evan said, the continuity I think is good. And also I kind of like just in general that we hired their special teams coordinator and we were kind of able to big time App State, which we are not far removed from just absolutely getting drummed by them in a bowl game. So to, pluck their special teams coordinator, take their kicker, punter, and long snapper with us, shove them in a locker, felt like a nice little win there after, especially what they did to us not that long ago. So it felt like another just step forward in the right direction as a program that, perception wise, we're able to do something like that. I think helps kind of speak volumes to the progress there. But I think we touched on everything there. You guys got any final parting words here?
I mean, you just touched on it. We talked, even like I said at the beginning, there are 136 teams in college football. A lot of their fan bases would probably celebrate if their defensive coordinator got fired. So you can take that with a grain of salt. But we did poach a P4 defensive coordinator to Denton, Texas. And those are, like you were just talking about with special teams, like those are little decisions that make or break G6 teams, especially where we're at reloading the way we are. It provides a little bit of a safety net, I think, in some aspects where there's less pressure on guys to like prove themselves. There's maybe a little bit more confidence in the group as a whole, just knowing that you have guys in charge who have played under the bright lights. So I'm happy about it. I mean, I don't think there's anybody who could argue that this was a bad hire in Palage or that this is a uninspiring group on defense. It's just a group that's different from last year, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've enjoyed hearing Palage. If you go on YouTube and kind of look up some of the stuff, I think he sounds like a smart guy. He sounds like the kind of guy that you see rise to the ranks of coaching at a young age. Maybe got promoted a little too early, too quick. But I think again, he seems like a guy who really gets the game of football, who really understands the relationship side of things and the just football knowledge side of things. I think he's a good, kind of rising young coach that we don't get exactly a ton of those come through Denton all the time. So to get a guy like that coming through, I hope he does well. I hope he puts his stamp on the defense and his time here in Denton, however long it ends up being. But I'm interested to see how it works out. I think he won the job over some pretty stiff competition. So that was a pretty impactful pickup. So we'll see if, I think obviously Neil Brown had to be pretty sold on him to pick him over some of the names that we were hearing. But anyways, with that, thanks everyone for listening this far, and we'll have some more stuff coming here in the coming weeks. But this has been.
Thank you, Evan, for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks, Evan. Enjoyed having you on.
Y'all really had a great time. Appreciate y'all letting me join.
Yep. And this won't be the last time you're hearing from Evan. But again, thanks everyone for listening. Go Mean Green.
Go Mean Green.